In today's video, we're going over one of my favorite wide receivers in the 2025 class. His name is Tez Johnson, wide receiver out of Oregon. What are his strengths and weaknesses? Where do we think he's utilized at the next level? What's his draft stock going to look like? And most importantly, what's he going to do in fantasy for us? Watch to the end of this video, and you should have a pretty good idea. As far as height and weight are concerned, PFF has him listed at 5'10", 165 pounds. If that wasn't already small, he actually measured in at the Senior Bowl a little over a month ago at 5'9", 156 pounds. So that makes him one of the smallest in terms of height and weight wide receivers in the NFL, bar none. So as far as his age, he's almost 23 years old, and he will be 23 years old for the entirety of his rookie season. Now, looking at some of his stats over his 5-year career, he is a fifth-year player, so take that as what you will. So he started his career off at Troy, which is kind of a small school, but he had pretty good production. As a true freshman, he had about 211 yards and 0 touchdowns, and he stepped it up as a sophomore, 712 yards and 4 touchdowns. We do like to see that uptick in production. Now, as far as his junior season is concerned, he was 856 yards and 4 touchdowns. So again, a little uptick in production. But as a senior in his 4th year, he was very, very good. 1,182 yards and 10 touchdowns at Oregon is very, very good numbers. Now, he went back for a 5th year this past season, and his production dipped a little bit. 898 yards and 10 touchdowns, but he still kept up some of those receiving grades of PFF, so that is good to note. So looking at some advanced stats here, I looked at every draft-eligible FBS wide receiver with at least 50 targets, which was about 260 players. Johnson ran 346 routes, which was 95.3% of his team routes. That's really good. He's on the field a lot. That's what we like to see. So, as far as his slot snap percentage and out wide snap percentages go, you'll see that he's mainly a slot guy, and I think that's where he's going to be at the next level for the most part. We do like that he's out wide a little bit of the time, but that's definitely not his strength. Now, as far as his yards per route run go, his 2.6 was good for 31st in the sample size. So, not a lot, considering he wasn't a 1,000-yard receiver this year. It's not as good as it would have been in 2023 per se. Now, his PFF receiving grade, though, 84.6 was good for 7th in the sample size. So, yards aren't everything, and PFF's seeing him as a top 10 wide receiver. Now, as far as his yak per reception, 7.4 was tied for 25th in the sample size. He's not really a great yak guy if you look at this number, but if you look at the film, he is really, really tricky with the ball in his hands. So that's one of the grades here that I don't really necessarily agree with. Now, as far as his missed tackles forced go, his 16th was also tied for 25th in the sample size. He's not really going to make you miss with physicality because of his size, obviously, but he's really elusive, and that's where he's getting probably all 16 of these missed tackles. Moving on to his contested catch percentage, this is not his game at all. You're not going to ask this 5'9", 156-pound man to jump up and catch contested catches. Even though he had 19 attempts at it this year, he only brought down 6 of them, which was good for 33.3%, which is not a good number whatsoever. If he's going to be used at the next level, teams are definitely not going to be asking him to be doing this. Now, as far as his targets, reception, and yards per game, he had 8.41 targets per game, which is very good. That means he was targeted a decent amount. Receptions per game of 6.83 is also good, which means the majority of his targets were catches. So that's very good. Now, as far as his yards per game, 74.83 is pretty solid. If we would have looked at his 2023 numbers, they would have been a lot better. So his production did take a little bit of a dip this year because Evan Stewart came on pretty strong this year. But 10 touchdowns, 0.83 a game, is very, very good. So a little up and down with these, but all in all, pretty solid. So, looking at some more advanced stats, specifically his grades versus man and zone, I saw his PFF grade of 79.0 was good for 39th in the sample size. Give it, we're still looking at the same 260 players, so that is pretty solid. His performance versus man was a lot better, in my opinion, on film than it shows here. But moving on to his yards per route run versus man was 2.83, and that was 41st in the sample size. So if you're going just based off grades, he's not really great versus man, but in my opinion, I think he is. I think he is. He's got really twitchy releases. Now, as far as his beating press goes, he's 156 pounds, so there's a big question mark at the next level about him beating press. But if teams can use him like the Kansas City Chiefs use Xavier Worthy, where they use him in motion and stuff, I think that's where he will excel at. Now, moving on to his PFF grade versus zone, 81.5 was good for 11th in the sample size, which is pretty solid. Pretty solid versus zone. And yards per route run versus zone was 2.28, which was 73rd in the sample size. So he got the majority of his yards versus man coverage and not zone. So do with that what you will. I think he's good versus man and zone. I think he's a really good route runner. He's just really small. That's the biggest question I have for him. So as far as his PFF grade on screens go, 97.9 was 5th in the sample size. So he's really good on screens. He actually had a good bit of targets. I can't recall how many targets he had, but he had a good bit. And he did do extremely well as far as production on those. Now, as far as his PFF grade in the slot goes, 91.6 was tied for second in the sample size. So according to PFF, he is the second best slot receiver in college football. I tend to agree with that, so no disagreements here. And his first downs caught, 51 was tied for ninth in the sample size. So some more ups and downs. Once we move on to the grading, I'll let you guys hear my actual opinion on this guy. But all in all, these grades are pretty solid. My favorite part of the video. So, Tez Johnson, wide receiver out of Oregon. He's 5'9", 156 pounds. He is a fifth-year senior, and our evaluation of him is an early to mid-third round pick. I think he's not going to go any higher than this just because of his size. I think many NFL teams are really going to question if he's going to be able to hold up at the next level because of how small he is. Now, he could bulk up for the combine and make those numbers look a little bit better, but I don't see him getting anywhere past about 165 pounds, which is still super small. Now, my high comp for him is a smaller Deshaun Jackson. I see him consistently on film stretching the field, making really big-time plays down the field, so there's that. Now, as far as a low comp for him, Darnell Mooney, a guy that's been a 1,000-yard receiver before, especially in the Chicago days. And then if you look at him last year in Atlanta, nobody really expected him to be anything. And he kind of shot up dynasty ranks and fantasy rankings because he actually showed up, especially during the middle part of the season. So I think Tez Johnson has a pretty safe floor if teams use him correctly. But then again, he's really small, and if a team doesn't use him correctly, he can be out of the NFL relatively quickly. Now, as far as our official grade for him, we gave him an 84 out of 100, which is a good prospect. Almost great. He's at the top of our good prospects, at least for the wide receivers we've graded thus far this year. Now, as far as his short routes are concerned, we saw him on screens, hitches, shallow crosses. His screens are especially good, as well as his shallow crosses. He's getting separation consistently on both of those. And like we said before, he's electric with the ball in his hands, as you'll see in some of the grades below. Now, as far as his medium routes are concerned, he was getting separation pretty much anywhere on the field because of how fast he is. Now, we bumped him a little bit because he does get knocked off his routes from time to time, and there was particularly a rep at the Senior Bowl where he got absolutely obliterated. So that is questionable. If a more physical cornerback gets his hands on him, especially a bigger one, he's going to have a hard time separating. That's where we get to his deep routes. We gave him a 3.5 out of 5, which we think if he doesn't get touched a lot during his route, he can separate versus pretty much any corner or safety in the NFL. The problem is if he gets somebody on him that's really physical and he can't hand fight them off of him, he's not getting any separation and he is going to get bullied. Now, as far as his double moves go, we saw some really, really clever double moves, especially like a stop and go. We saw a slant that turned into basically a uh, pylon shot to the end zone, which was also really, really good. So that's why we gave him a 4.5 out of 5. He's consistently using these double moves and he's getting open on them. Now, as far as his releases are concerned, we gave him a 4 out of 5. The reason why we did that is because we genuinely think he has really good releases. The problem is those releases can get stopped from time to time due to people press covering him. So, all in all, we think his technique on his releases are pretty much flawless, but then again, the size comes up again where a physical corner doesn't care about how good your releases are. He's just going to stop you in your tracks and he's going to make your route a lot slower that way. Now, moving on to his speed, I think he's going to run in the low 4.3s, in that 4.33 range, but he runs even faster than that on tape that we've seen. So we gave him a 9.5 out of 10. Almost in that worthy Bond range, but not quite. So you'll see that on tape time and time again. Just look up Tez Johnson highlights on YouTube. You'll see a ton of him just scorching past defenses. Now, as far as acceleration is concerned, we gave him a 9 out of 10, which is really, really good. I mean, it's electric. He's quick off the line. I mean, if, like we said earlier, if they can put this guy in motion and get him out in open space on these kind of like short routes, like these bubble screens and stuff like that, that the NFL has been showing more and more positive trends towards, he can get a lot of yards. Now, he's not going to break any tackles per se, but he can accelerate upfield like anyone else. So as far as his deceleration is concerned, he's got some of the quickest snap downs in terms of routes. As far as his hitches and cuts in and out of his routes, I mean, he is a pretty route runner. So we gave him a 5 out of 5 there. Now, as far as agility is concerned, we also gave him a perfect grade of 5 out of 5. He is so agile with the ball in his hands. You'll see him consistently make these crazy little juke moves, spin moves, cuts, things like that, where he just makes people look silly in open space. As far as change of direction, kind of that same deal. We gave him a perfect grade of 5 out of 5. He's really good at shifting his weight around. It's not like there's a lot of weight to shift around, but he can shift his weight around really, really well and really, 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 really quick as well. So there's that. Now, as far as his catching's concerned, it's almost perfect. He's just not physical at the catch point. That's just not his strength, right? So we didn't see many drops on film, if any, I don't recall. So we gave him a 4.5 out of that. The only reason it's not a 5 is because he's just not good in contested catches. He's not big enough. If he was big enough, I'm sure he could bring down some of these, but he's just not. So that's why we gave him a 3 out of 5 for his catch in traffic. He's, when he catches these really physical balls that are coming in when the guys are right around him, he just can't really haul them in as much. Now, run after catch, though. As you saw, his deceleration, agility, and change of direction skills, if he can get into open space at all, he is a big-time problem for defenses. He's got the speed. He's got the elusiveness. He's kind of like Tank Dell in a way, in that regard at least, but just faster. Now, as far as his dog factor is concerned, this little guy has got some pit bull in him. We gave him a 5 out of 5 for sure. He is not shying away from physicality or anything like that. He loves contact. And we saw that time and time again on film, which is surprising that he didn't miss that many games. So one of the concerns for NFL teams are probably going to be his health. Like, is he going to be able to take these hits at the next level? I think he can, because we saw him basically, trying to truck over defenders and stuff like that. Obviously, he's not the biggest, so it doesn't really work out a lot. but he does not shy away from contact at all. So that's why we give him a 5 out of 5 dog factor. Considering that he's so small, he doesn't care. So as far as his analytics are concerned, he's had pretty much solid production in his 2 years at Troy outside of his freshman season. They weren't anything to write home about, but they were decent years. And then his senior season, his 4th year at Oregon, he had over 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns, which is really good. And then this past year, he had 10 touchdowns and almost 1,000 yards again. So that's why we gave him a 7.5 out of 10 there. Now, his projected draft capital, he is projected to be a 3rd-round pick. So that's why we gave him a 3 out of 5 there. And then this is one of the worries for me. His XZ slot ability, I don't see him as an X or Z at the next level, unfortunately. I think he's going to be a pure slot guy, kind of similar to how you see like Cooper Kupp utilized, except even more linear than how Cooper Kupp's utilized. So we give him a 2 out of 5 there. So moving on to my worries and limitations, I think he's going to be slot specific at the NFL level, which might hurt his usage a little bit. If he goes to a team like the Chicago Bears, for example, or the Jacksonville Jaguars, he's not going to be the number 1 option, and he might even be the number 2 or even number 3 option, depending on where he lands, because we do see teams like the Indianapolis Colts with Josh Downs, where their slot-specific guy can lead the team in yards, but it's not so much consistent. Now, another worry that I have with him is his size. I think at the NFL level, if people find a way to press him or knock him off his routes, he is not going to be very effective at the next level. All right, so where does Tez Johnson stack up with the rest of the 2025 class? Well, obviously, we have Travis Hunter in a grade of his own at a 91 as a generational prospect. Well, I don't really think he's going to be playing wide receiver at the next level. We'll talk more about that in future videos. So I don't think Travis Hunter necessarily needs to be included here. But we have our upper echelon of receivers like Tet McMillan, Luther Burden, and Jalen Royals that all 3 are guys that we're really, really high on. Tez Johnson ranks just below that at an 84, at the top of the good tier. Now, like we said, if Tez Johnson was 5'11", 190 to 200 pounds rather, he would be in that tier of Luther Burden and Tet McMillan for sure, no questions asked. So his size really did kind of hurt him here. Last but not least, we want to give a special shout out to all of our Patreon supporters. Thank you to Big Hunt, SP, Masjack, and Infamy MTG for supporting the channel. It really does mean a lot to us, and we really appreciate it. Now, if you want to become a Patreon member yourself, you'll gain access to a lot of cool things, like a private Discord server where we talk about fantasy football and regular football. You'll gain access to private live streams from time to time. We'll give you access to videos a day early, and even the coolest thing, in my opinion, is we give you custom videos per request. We've already done one on Isaac Garindo, and we want to do plenty more there. So, again, thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. And if you're watching this video and you enjoy the content, please like, subscribe, and even comment. It helps us out with the algorithm. And again, thank you guys for watching, and we hope that you guys have a great day.